All right. We'll make some more. But for right now, that's it. That's one set, so just give whoever didn't get one the whole set. And we'll complete another set before we leave tonight. All right, we're talking about Revelation, the 18th chapter. And we were talking about how Babylon is not specifically going to be that region by Iran, Iraq that falls, and with its fall come the destruction of the monetary system that many say it is. Babylon has always come to be descriptive of the source of false religion as well as the source of the Antichrist. And with that comes much of what we read about in the Old Testament, specifically the prophets looking forward toward the doom of the Antichrist. But in Revelation, as we see the vials of wrath poured out, with the last vial comes the remembrance of Babylon to God. And with that remembrance, God has something special for it. So what we have here is a specific chapter dealing with the criteria that basically lists Babylon. Many of the things that we've actually followed on it, as far as its criteria, show us that this is not speaking of a religion as we know it. It's not talking about something as organized as the Catholic Church or the Muslim Church or the Jehovah's Witnesses or anything like that. Babylon is not America. Babylon is not Rome. Babylon is referred to as something that has far more reaching implications. I've said it before, when Babylon is destroyed, the whole world cries. The world isn't going to cry if the Pope died. The whole world isn't going to fall apart. Merchants aren't going to be crying, avoiding at all costs to get around that area because they're afraid of the judgment of God. Yet these are the criteria laid out. One of the things it says is that nations, God's people themselves, they have fornicated with her. This imagery of a woman riding the seven-headed beast. The imagery is that everybody fornicates with her. Everybody lays with her. She's a deceiver, almost as if John understood Jesus when he spoke of the deceitfulness of riches, the deceit that's involved with the idea of chasing riches. Well, that's what happens when Babylon is destroyed. Everybody cries. And we've come to find out that Babylon isn't speaking specifically of a false religion per se, as much as it's speaking of a system that God is going to destroy. In that 18th chapter, we also find that the criteria there is that she owns everything. She possesses everything. Everything that men desire to have, she has. And that's everything that connects us to her. So one of the things that God desires to do is to break us from under that power, under that spell. Now, I had Brianna pass out those sheets there. We were actually covering some good ground concerning some of these players. We've talked about the Rothschilds, talked a little bit about the formation of the Federal Reserve. Today we're actually going to be reading out of, again, Rule by Secrecy. I told you about this book. What I like about it is that it identifies the players. And in identifying the players, at least we get a little background as to who these people are when we begin to read about what their part was, or what part they played, or what role they played in establishing this system that quickly gained ground and took hold of our country to the extent that it even subverts our Constitution to be there, to the extent that much of what we see in our country is actually governed by this. Some of you probably had the opportunity, as I did, to listen to the President's State of the Union address, and much that gets stated in there is based on exactly what we're learning. When we speak of these types of books, this one specifically, Rule by Secrecy, Federal Reserve Conspiracy, all of these books that point to a gathering of minds that control things, people would have you feel that you're silly or that you're dumb to even consider these things, but nonetheless, it's even more foolish for somebody not to think that. I mean, it doesn't matter at what level of business you're in. If you sit down and have a business meeting, you're actually conspiring to acquire either more business or to broaden the spectrum of your business. If you sell tires, you want to be able to sell everybody tires, not just some people tires. You want to get demography. You want to find out who's where. You want to find out who drives what. You need to know what to carry. So if you sit down with this meeting of the minds to expand your customer base, That's conspiracy. The only problem is that we've always viewed conspiracy as something in the negative sense, when conspire literally comes from the two words. It means breathe together. Let's say the same thing. Let's get in accord with something. Are we so foolish to believe that these individuals that have these great empires of finances, are we so naive as to think that these individuals don't meet and say, how can we sell more to a broader customer base? How can we get certain nations to buy our product? How do we introduce our business into these other nations? That's nothing more than conspiracy. So when we are faced with the challenge that these are conspiracies, of course they are. Everything in life is conspiracy. But this particular conspiracy is one beyond our grasp, beyond our imagination, because it's hard for us to fathom that there are individuals who literally can run the world. So we're going to be talking about John D. Rockefeller today. So grab your sheets, first page, on the left it'll say Rockefeller. You see that? John Davison Rockefeller continues to be the most recognized and perhaps the most despised rich man in the world, even though he's been dead since 1937. During the past century, no one family in America has assembled such power and influence as the Rockefellers, thanks to their wealth and their close ties to England. Years ago, the Rockefeller name continually cropped up in many discussions of secret societies, but today's mass media rarely speak of the Rockefeller role in world events. At one time, the name John D. Rockefeller was on everybody's lips, and his finances were known to all. An 1897 edition of the Rural Texas newspaper reported, John D. Rockefeller falls asleep, sleeps 8.5 hours every night, retiring at 10:30 and rising at 7. Every morning when he gets up, he is $17,705 richer than he was when he went to bed. He sits down to breakfast at 8 o'clock, leaves the table at 8:30. In that short time, that short half hour, his wealth has grown $1,041.50. On Sunday, he goes to church. In the 2 hours he's away from home, his riches have grown $4,166. His nightly amusement is playing the violin. Every evening when he picks up the instrument, he is $50,000 richer he is when he laid it down the previous night. These little facts give some idea of the relentless growth of this man's fortune. One insight into the forging of John D.'s business philosophy might be gained by an anecdote told by Nelson Rockefeller. It seems when John D. was a small child, his father, William Big Bill Rockefeller, who sold cancer cures from a medicine wagon, taught him how to leap into his arms from a tall chair. One time his father held his arms out to catch him, but pulled him away as little John jumped. The fallen son was told sternly, remember, never trust anyone completely, not even me. Nice dad, huh? I'll tell you, anybody running around selling cancer cures, you already know where he's coming from. Huh? At the start of the American Civil War, Rockefeller was a young agricultural commodities broker in Cleveland, Ohio. He quickly recognized the potential of the fledgling petroleum industry there. In 1863, he and some associates built a refinery. In 1870, he incorporated Standard Oil Company of Ohio. I want you to take your pencil. I want you to write on these pages, okay? Write them, mark them, and you can use them for your own references later. The National City Bank of Cleveland, which was identified in congressional hearings as one of the three Rothschild, the dominant European banking family, and we've already talked about them. It's one of the Rothschild banks in the United States, provided John D. Rockefeller with the money to begin his monopolization of the oil refinery business, resulting in the formation of Standard Oil, noted a recent investigative video entitled The Money Masters. So John D.'s money came from where? Rothschilds. Rockefeller, who was quoted saying, competition is a sin, ruthlessly eliminated competitors by either merging or buying them out. Failing that, he cut prices until his competitors were all forced to sell. He also managed lucrative railroad rebate agreements, which ensured him a near monopoly on the transportation of oil. Standard Oil, the direct ancestor of Exxon, prospered enormously, and by 1880, Rockefeller owned or controlled 95% of all oil produced in the United States. Now, underline that statement. In 1880, Rockefeller owned or controlled 95% of all oil produced in the U.S. What does that do to you? Let me ask you a question. If you own or if you have control over 95% of the oil, don't you also control the transportation of the country? Yes. Now, if he was to sit down and have a meeting as to how to sell more oil or how to possess more oil, wouldn't you consider that a conspiracy? Huh? Trouble for Rockefeller began in 1902 when the publication of a series of articles by Ida Tarbell, the daughter of a Pennsylvania oil producer, run out of business by Rockefeller, Based on 5 years of research, Tarbell's series was published in McClure's magazine and entitled The History of Standard Oil Company. One reviewer proclaimed her work a fearless unmasking of a moral criminality masquerading under the robes of respectability and Christianity. Tarbell's expose resulted in government and court actions which appeared to break up Standard Oil's monopoly. However, as early as 1882, Rockefeller had moved to mask his business dealings by creating the first great American corporation, the Standard Oil Trust. The trust embraced a maze of legal structures, making its workings virtually impervious to public investigation and understanding, explained the New Encyclopedia Britannica. Such maneuvering continued until 1892 when the Ohio Supreme Court ordered the trust dissolved. Instead, Rockefeller simply moved Standard Oil headquarters to New York City. In 1899, all assets and interests were transferred to a new creation, Standard Oil Company of New Jersey. In 1906, the government charged Standard Oil with violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. Let's stop there, because I want you to see that if old Bill Gates from Microsoft would have taken his lead from this fella, he wouldn't have had any problems. All right? What would you say? I don't really know, but I know Mac got his butt kicked by the IBM clones. Talking about computers, every computer sold on IBM clone has Microsoft goods in it, whether it's the MS-DOS or the Windows version, right? Or the NT, all their new stuff. That's all Gates, right? And he got sued. Everybody was suing him. For what? For having a monopoly. He should have read Rockefeller. All right, 1906. U.S. government charged Standard Oil with violating Sherman Antitrust Act. Although apologists argue the Standard was simply caught in an emotional tidal wave of public discontent over the excesses of big business, the U.S. Supreme Court on May 15, 1911, couched its decision in very clear terms. 7 men and a corporate machine have now conspired against their fellow citizens. For the safety of the Republic, we now decree that this dangerous conspiracy must be ended by November 15th. Now, here you got the Supreme Court making a statement referring to this as a conspiracy. 8 of the companies formed after the dissolution. Now, you'll like this. 8 of the companies formed after the dissolution retained Standard Oil in their names. But of these were soon altered to present the image of diversity. So, the court says, you can't have a monopoly. By November 15th, this better be done. So what does Rockefeller do? He splits the companies up and renames them. Like if there's a whole bunch of them. 8 of the companies formed after dissolution retained Standard Oil in their names, but even those were soon altered to present the image of diversity. Standard Oil Company in New York first merged with the trust company Vacuum Oil to form Saucony Vacuum, which in 1966 became Mobil Oil. Standard Oil of Indiana joined with Standard Oil Nebraska, Standard Oil of Kansas, and by 1985 had become Amoco Corporation. In 1984, the combination of Standard Oil of California, Standard Oil of Kentucky became Chevron Corporation, while the Standard Oil of New Jersey in 1972 became Exxon Corporation. Do you like that? Other former Standard companies include Atlantic Richfield, that's ARCO, Buckeye Pipeline, Pennzoil, Union Tank Car Company. Ironically, the breakup of Standard Oil only increased the wealth of Rockefeller, who now owned 1/4 share of the 33 different oil companies created by the breakup of Standard. Shortly after the turn of the century, Rockefeller became America's first billionaire. So they forced him to break it up, and what happens then? Makes more money. Now see, this is why I said before, if you get mad at Mobil and say, I'm going to really screw these people, I'm going to go shop at Exxon. Huh? I'm going to ARCO. Oh, I can't believe ARCO's charging too much. I think I'll go over to Mobil. Go over to Shell. What happened? Who are you paying? Same guy. Continued. Rockefeller control was confirmed in the late 1930s by the only study of true ownership in America's largest corporation ever made by the Securities and Exchange Commission. The study, The Distribution of Ownership in the 200 Largest Non-Financial Corporations, was published in 1940. It concluded that Rockefeller holdings, while seemingly small, most were under 20% of outstanding stocks. Nevertheless, when compared to the remaining widely dispersed ownership, were considered sufficient to give the Rockefeller family control over the corporations. Once again, interlocking directorships allowed the Rockefellers and others to maintain control over the oil industry. All of the 8 largest oil companies were interlocked in 1972 through large commercial banks, with at least one other member of the top group wrote Dr. John M. Blair, former assistant chief economist for the Federal Trade Commission. Exxon had 4 such interlocks with Mobil Standard Oil of Indiana, Texaco, and Arco. Mobil had 3 with Exxon, Shell, and Texaco, as did Standard of Indiana with Exxon, Texaco, and Arco, as well as Texaco with Exxon, Mobil, Standard of Indiana, Shell with Mobil. Whenever all 6 largest commercial banks, exclusive Bank of America, and Western Bank Corporation hold their board meetings, directors of the top 8, including Gulf and Southern California, or SoCal, they met with directors on the average of 3.2 of their largest competitors. Ironically, by the turn of the new century, the old Standard monopoly was being reformed by the anticipated merging of 2 of the world's oil giants, Exxon and Mobil. This $75 billion mega deal was quickly called Rockefeller's Revenge. At this writing, the consolidation of oil companies has continued with announced plans for British Petroleum PLC to acquire Amoco. By the time of his death in 1937, Rockefeller and his son John D. Rockefeller Jr. had not only built up an amazing oil empire, but established such institutions as the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, General Education Board, University of Chicago, Rockefeller Foundation, Lincoln School, where the Rockefeller children began their educations, and Rockefeller University in New York City. Rockefellers were also greatly interested in the eugenics movement, a program of scientifically applied genetic selection to maintain and improve ideal human characteristics, including birth and population control. This idea grew from the writings of Victorian scientist Sir Francis Galton, who after the study reached the conclusion that prominent members of the British society were such as because they had eminent parents, thus combining Darwin's concepts of survival of the fittest with the class-conscious question of who's your daddy. So here you got oil guys who suddenly take on great interests for eugenics. And I think we've talked a little bit about this, so go ahead and mark that part of your sheets there. If this sounds like a Nazi experiment run wild, consider that the late 19th century, the United States joined 14 other nations in passing some type of eugenics legislation. 30 states had laws providing for the sterilization of mental patients and imbeciles. At least 60,000 of such defectives were legally sterilized. This was done for population control as well as getting rid of some of the bad genes. Of course, to determine who was dirtying the gene pool requires extensive population statistics. So in 1910, the Eugenics Record Office was established as a branch of the Galton National Library in London, endowed by Mrs. E.H. Harriman, wife of the railroad magnate Edward Harriman and mother of diplomat Averell Harriman. Mrs. Harriman in 1912 sold her substantial shares of New York's Guaranteed Trust Bank to J.P. Morgan, thus assuring his control over that institution. So here you were starting at least to get an introduction to who some of these players are. 1900, the Harrimans, the family that gave the Prescott Bush family a start, and we've read this before. So those of you that sit there and listen to jackasses argue about George Bush just caring about Texas Oil and Enron and all that stuff, this is where they got their money. These people go back so far with money, they don't need Enron. After 1900, the Harriman's family gave the Prescott Bush family a start, along with the Rockefellers. Let me ask you a question. If this is where the Prescott Bush family got its start, with these people and this money, where do these people come from? Huh? They just pop up out of Texas? Do you really still get the impression that anybody can be the president? Huh? Along with the Rockefellers, they funded more than $11 million to create eugenics research laboratory at Cold Springs Harbor, New York, as well as eugenics studies at Harvard, Columbia, and Cornell. The first International Congress of Eugenics was convened in London in 1912 with Winston Churchill as director. How many of you know Winston Churchill was the director of that? Obviously, the concept of bloodlines was highly significant to these people. Now, I've always told you, I keep telling you, keep pounding it over and over, pedigree's everything. You think these people are stupid? These people understand that concept. 1932, when the Congress met in New York, it was the Hamburg America shipping line, controlled by the Harriman Associates, George Walker, and Prescott Bush. These are the relatives of our president that brought prominent Germans to the meeting. Don't you just love this? I mean, everybody, when you think of eugenics and you think of, eugenics and race mixing and things like that, first thing pops up in your mind is Adolf Hitler, Gregory Peck and the boys from Brazil. Huh? But who are the American counterparts behind this? It's the Bush family, financed by the Rockefellers and the Harrimans. Somebody ought to ask him about that. Who invited the Germans, by the way? They did. Hey, bring the Germans. They're good at this stuff. They brought prominent Germans to the meeting. One was Dr. Ernst Rudin of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Genealogy and Demography in Berlin. Rudin was unanimously elected president of the International Foundation of Eugenic Societies for his work in founding the German Society for Race Hygiene, a forerunner of Hitler's racial institutes. That sounds nice, doesn't it? Huh? Where'd this stuff get started? Well, we like to point the finger at Germany, huh? Who funded these people? Huh? When Hitler finally needed somebody, what did he do? He called his Germans back. Eugenics work under more politically correct names continues right up to today. They just call it things like genome. Huh? They got fancy names for it. Now they just want to talk about cloning dollies. Think they haven't cloned folk yet? Huh? Stem cells. Huh? They want to tell you about stem cell research. All right. Eugenics work under more politically correct names continues right up to today. General William Draper Jr. was a supporting member of the International Eugenics Congress in 1932, and despite or because of his ties to the Harriman and Bush families, was named head of the Economic Division of the U.S. Control Commission in Germany at the end of hostilities. According to the authors Tarpley and Scheikin, General Draper, in later years, founded the Population Crisis Committee and the Draper Fund, joining with the Rockefeller and DuPont families to promote eugenics as population control. Now, who gets to pick this? The administration of President Lyndon Johnson, advised by General Draper on the subject, began financing birth control in the tropical countries through the U.S. Agency for International Development. Now, this is that group of people that go around saying, well, there ain't enough food in India, we got to go give them birth control. I don't know if you ever heard of this group. This is a group that goes around putting all the women all over the world on the pill. Oh, we got to go out to Chile. What's in Chile? There's a group of women up in there, and we don't want them having babies, so we're going to give them birth control. Huh? What's up with it? Who gets to choose that? And you got a lot of people all upset about this stuff. We're cutting back funds. You get cut. These groups get cut, and everybody says, oh, we're going to kill the world. You really think we're going to kill the world if a bunch of Amazonians have babies in the rainforest? Huh? Oh, there's a bunch of people out there in Africa. If we let them have babies, everything's going to run amok. They're going to breathe up all the air. Got to go up there and give them birth control pills. Oh, they're stupid. They don't know about, raising kids, so we're not going to let them have any. Who gets to decide that? Huh? Back in the old days, there was a reason why there was a stigma attached to what they called illegitimacy. All right? Just like Jesus said. He said, a city on a hill can't be hid. You can't hide it because it's going to grow. A seed that is sown can't be hid because it's going to grow. And Jesus was talking literally about the gospel in us. You can't hide these things. I said you can't be a little bit pregnant. Back in the day, there used to be a stigma on pregnancy. If a woman popped up pregnant, it was because she'd been laying around. And people understood what took place. Now you got folk like these running around, putting everybody on the pill and taking away the stigma. Now you can be a tramp and no one knows it. Now, think about it. Movements like that, people say these are human rights issues. These people are after human rights? What is the purpose of this? They're trying to preserve the gene pool. They don't want to have to go fight a bunch of Amazonians. They don't want to go, fight a bunch of folk in Africa. They don't want to fight a bunch of people out there, on the back country of Australia. A bunch of Aboriginal people. All you have to do is look at the Middle East. They're not moved by anything. They say, we got $50 million. Just turn over bin Laden and his top commander. How come there's no takers? In this country, there's, what's that, America's Most Wanted? They put up $25,000 rewards, and they find people the next week. By the next episode, you're watching the guy get arrested for $25,000. How come you can't give away $25 million in countries like Afghanistan? Because they could care less about money. Now, you think these people want them having babies? They talk about, we got to get rid of Al-Qaeda schools. What does Al-Qaeda schools teach? We don't need money. Avoid the West. It's evil. Now, are they really avoiding the West as far as Americans or the system? These people don't want people having babies. Now, let me ask you a question. Look, think about it. This goes back to the turn of the century, 1900s. We're in the year 2000. 100 years. They've been working on this for 100 years. You learn about something like, do you know there's an organization of women that go around the world putting third world nations on the pill? Wonderful. What does that do for them? Well, it doesn't let them have 12 babies like they used to in the past. By not having 12 babies, they're able to afford to feed them. How the hell did they eat before that? Them Chinese seem to manage pretty well, don't they? The Indians, got 1 billion of them. Huh? They might not live as nice as we do. But how come they made it? They've been working on this for 100 years. You don't think somebody's sitting around talking about what part of the world should be populated, what part shouldn't? Huh? And then you got these dingy broads out there thinking they're on a mission. Huh? They think they're on a mission. We're going to save the world. How terrible it would be to be an Indian woman with 12 kids. Whose work are they really doing? Huh? That make you laugh? You know how many times they've tried to pass a law where they've tried to sterilize women? They're on welfare. Got 3 or 4 pedigrees running through them. They show up at the county general to have another one. And, you know, the doctor sitting there with a big question mark on his forehead, wanting to yank them tubes right out of her. Huh? Why are they doing that? These people have been at it 100 years, man. That doesn't bother you? That doesn't bother you that these people started out with the idea that the reason they're rich is because their gene pool is clean, and they want to pass legislation to clean the gene pool, and that they've been at it for 100 years, and we still want to deny there's a conspiracy? Huh? What business is it of yours or anybody to tell some Aboriginal woman to get on the pill? Huh? Somebody says, well, this is one world and we all have to live in it. Listen, we got 2 huge oceans on the right and on the left. Let them do what they want to do. All right? They're not going to have so many babies, they're going to start floating over. Oh, this is one world. If they breathe the air out there, it affects us here. That's what they say to you. It doesn't. These people have been working at it 100 years, man. General Draper was George Bush's guru on population question. Draper's son and heir. Now, isn't that something? How that guy Draper, listen to this, 100 years, how does that guy Draper, from 1932, how does he end up George Bush's advisor? You would think after all that time, this Draper family would have just fallen off the politics and just stuck with money, right? But as we read in Eustace Mullins' book, what did he say? He says these people float in and out of politics from the public sector. That's why I said when you look at any president's cabinet, usually they're picked right up out of the corporate world. They're a CEO to some big corporation. They move them in because, quote unquote, their management skills. What they don't tell you is how they've been pedigreed through these families and how they're part of the same societies with these people. And this is the reason why they're able to move in and out from public office back into the corporate world. Doesn't it bother you that, you know, do you think it's a coincidence that a guy like Al Gore goes from vice president, loser president, to teaching in a university? Huh? On a lecture circuit? What's he going to teach? Good sportsmanship? Huh? Going to teach classes on charisma? How do these people move in and out of the public? Do people really say, he used to be the vice president, let's make him chairman? Huh? All right, let's go on. General Draper was George Bush's guru on the population question. Draper's son and heir, William H. Draper III, was co-chairman for finance, chief of fundraising of the Bush for President National Campaign Organization in 1980. Well, wait a minute. How do we go from eugenics and babies to campaign financing? Somebody please tell me how the two are connected. Don't you think his expertise was on putting third world Aboriginal women on the pill? Huh? Finding systems to pick out the imbeciles and sterilize them? What's wrong with this Draper family? They're too diversified for me. Suddenly he's chief of fundraising for the Bush presidency. Must have gone out and started fleecing the imbeciles. The younger Draper went on to work with population control activities of the United Nations. Now, you're going to get upset when you find out about this United Nations business. Rudin's eugenics work was, to a large part, funded by the Rockefeller money. Circle this next sentence. These wealthy American families, like their counterpart in Britain, feel themselves to be racially superior, and they wish to protect their racial superiority, commented author Ick. Now, when we say racially superior, we're not just talking about the fact that they're white. Racially superior is talking about that they are actually the top of the food chain in white. There's white people these folk don't even like. These people 100 years ago started a eugenics foundation because they feel themselves racially superior and they want to protect their racial superiority. Now, how do you do that? How does a kingly lion protect its racial superiority? That's right, you marry each other. Huh? Nepotism proved a connecting link in these family chains. According to biographer Alvin Moscow, starting in the year 1917, continuing for the next 5 years, the elder Rockefeller handed over his fortune to his only son and heir with no strings attached. John Jr., while dealing primarily with philanthropic activities, nevertheless followed his father's mode of business practice, particularly in opposition to unions. This stance softened, at least publicly, following the Ludlow Massacre in 1914, in which Colorado militia members fired at strikers at the Rockefeller-owned Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, killing 40 persons. Now, some of you that work union are familiar with this because unions actually celebrate this day. They actually take time off, stand there, moments of silence, and even don't work on these days to recognize this. Rockefeller Jr. helped to create the United Service Organization, the USO. Now, what in the world do these guys know about the USO? Huh? By the way, you know who got put in charge of the Roswell crash? Huh? Rockefeller. Go from USO to UFOs. Huh? Are these people so diverse in their education that you can do that? You can go from oil to oil? I mean, this guy's so busy with philanthropic endeavors. He's got to go make the troops happy. How come they never went? Huh? That'd have made a lot of people happy. Rockefeller Jr. helped create the United Service Organization, the USO, for soldiers during World War II, supervised the building of Rockefeller Center in Manhattan. After the war, it was Rockefeller who donated the land in Manhattan for the headquarters of the United Nations. Isn't that wonderful? Now, somebody's got that much money to give land and give money. Who do you think helps run the place? Huh? Rockefeller Jr. sired one daughter, Abby, who died of cancer in 1976. I guess that eugenics wasn't too good, huh? Got some bad stuff in the gene pool there. At age 72, and 5 sons, John III, Nelson, Lawrence, Winthrop, and David. The eldest, John III, became chairman of the Rockefeller Foundation and guided millions of dollars to international agencies such as India International Center and the International House of Japan. His personal money went to his fabulous Oriental art collection and his creation of the Populations Council, a center concerned with overpopulation and family planning. These guys got a problem with people having babies, don't they? Well, these guys would have got along famously with those lost tribes, huh? Because the one thing those lost tribes people knew how to do is what? Have babies, man. Center concerned with overpopulation and family planning. Now, what do they care? Huh? Listen, if they're really so concerned, they ought to, and so philanthropic, how come they don't give money to these poor families? Why, instead of giving money to these poor families, they ought to stop them? That's the ego of these maniacs. Died in 1978, but his son, John J. David Rockefeller, carried on the family's political interest by serving as governor of West Virginia. Isn't that funny? Moving in and out of politics. Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller also carved out a career in politics. Prior to World War II, he journeyed to Venezuela, where he discovered the culture of South America as well as the lucrative oil business. Because of his knowledge of the area, President and fellow New Yorker Franklin D. Roosevelt set Rockefeller on his government vocation by appointing him coordinator for the inter-American affairs. Isn't that wonderful? Rockefeller also served as four-term governor of New York State, following various posts in the family, oil, and banking businesses. Just bouncing in and out of public life and private. 1953, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare was established. Now, how many of you knew this? Huh? Department of Health, Education. I mean, if you can't stop them from having babies, now you go tell them what to do with the babies. Huh? 1953, Department of Health, Education, and Welfare was established. And Rockefeller was named Undersecretary. Isn't that funny? You go from philanthropist to oil, Oriental art. Now he's named Undersecretary on recommendation of Secretary Oveta Culp-Hobby. Here Rockefeller was able to push through many social programs as detailed by author Alvin Moscow. Who wrote, Oveta Culp-Hobby was out front as the secretary. Nelson worked behind the scenes, finding key personnel to head various programs, promulgating research and studies, putting together new programs, and then trying to steer those new programs through the Eisenhower administration and through sometimes skeptical Congress. Eisenhower even appointed Rockefeller special assistant for foreign affairs, the same office held his close friend Henry Kissinger held under President Nixon. Isn't that something? What qualifies these guys? Must be fun, huh? Like Tooter the Turtle. I want to be, every week you want to be something, huh? Remember Tooter the Turtle? Huh? Am I too old for you guys? Remember Tooter the Turtle? He was that turtle who always said, I want to be a soldier. And whenever he got in trouble being a soldier, help Mr. Wizard, remember that? I want to be a policeman. And then when somebody's about to run him over, help Mr. Wizard. Huh? Isn't that something, this Rockefeller family? You get anything. I mean, it's not enough to have money, man. All the presidents are kissing your boots. He continually sought the Republican presidential nomination. I guess he couldn't help it. He wanted to be the big boss. His plans were thwarted by Nixon in both 1960-68, by Senator Barry Goldwater in 64. Rockefeller eventually was appointed Vice President of the United States in 1974 by Gerald Ford. Eugenics program, huh? Well, he probably had her under the population control plan. Lawrence Spelman Rockefeller became the most business-oriented of both brothers and enjoyed a successful career as a venture capitalist. Developing an early interest in aviation, he invested in Eastern Airlines in 1938 along with famed aviator Captain Eddie Rickenbacker. Turned the airline into one of the world's largest. Rockefeller also invested heavily in the dreams of a young Scotsman named James McDonnell Jr., who went on to launch what became the McDonnell Douglas Aircraft Corporation. He entered the realm of environmentalism and became chairman of the Citizens Advisory Committee on Environmental Equality. So here you got a Rockefeller now doing what? Environmental work. Where do these people not have their hands now? All right. Winthrop Rockefeller was considered the maverick of the Rockefeller clan, dropping out of Yale in 1934. This is a bad seed. He made his way to Texas, where he worked as an oil field roustabout. During World War II, he served as a combat infantryman in the Pacific Theater, earning a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star with 2 oak leaf clusters. Returning home, he developed a taste for drinking and women and New York Cafe Society. In 1953, tiring of a lifestyle, he suddenly moved to Arkansas, where he was voted Arkansas Man of the Year. Huh? Now, does it surprise you that Bill Clinton was governor? Huh? I guess there's not much to pick from, huh? Well, I could have done that back in the day. His famous name alone allowed him to gain the office of governor in 1967. It was then that a young Arkansas Democrat, Rhodes Scholar, and DeMolay member named Bill Clinton may have gained the attention of Rockefeller. Winthrop, too, died of cancer in 1973, just 2 months before his 61st birthday. So, old Rockefeller's down there, and old Billy Clinton now, huh? And people think that old George Stephanopoulos just came up and whispered in his ear, I can make you the president. Huh? Y'all read his book? The iron was hot. Old Billy didn't even realize it. Oh, Georgie, it's time. We can make you the president. Huh? Now, these are strictly coincidences and accidents, right? David Rockefeller was the youngest of the 5 Rockefeller brothers and the one who became the most powerful, if not the most prominent. After earning a BS degree from Harvard, he entered the London School of Economics, a school largely funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. Huh. So if you go to the University of Chicago, you go to Harvard, what do you get? A good dose of what they want you to get, right? All right. The Carnegie United Kingdom Trust Fund and the widow of J.P. Morgan, partner Willard Straight. Here he came in contact with the teachings of Ruskin and other socialists, including Harold Lasky. Educated at Oxford, Lasky earlier advocated political pluralism, but later turned to Marxism, became a luminary in Britain's Socialist Party. He once wrote that the state is the fundamental instrument of society. Returning to the States, David Rockefeller exhibited his deep feelings for England in a letter to the New York Times, April 1941, which he stated, "We should stand by the British Empire to the limit and at any cost." Just before the outbreak of war, he obtained a doctorate degree from the University of Chicago. His doctoral thesis was entitled Unused Resources and Economic Waste. Perhaps articulating the driving ambition of the Rockefeller brothers, he wrote, "Of all forms of waste, however, that which is the most abhorrent is idleness. There is a moral stigma attached to unnecessary and involuntary idleness, which was deeply embedded in our conscience." During the war, he entered the U.S. Army as a private, but soon was working in North Africa and France with the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, forerunner to the CIA. Isn't that something? Well, I would love to be a private and end up in the OSS, the CIA. Huh? By the way, another Harvard graduate named George H. Bush also became head of the CIA. Huh? H.W. Bush, Herbert Walker Bush. Isn't that something? You go in as a private and you end up in the CIA. Must be nice, huh? All right, let's keep reading. Bunch of spoiled babies. This experience, along with his schooling in England, strengthened his lifelong concern with foreign affairs. It was mostly probably during this time that Rockefeller developed high-level intelligence contacts, which later brought him insider knowledge of many top-secret operations. Well, I guess so. If you're in the CIA, you know everything. 1948, David Rockefeller was chairman of the board of the trustees of the Rockefeller Institute. President of the institute was Dr. Detlev Wolf-Bronk, a biophysicist specializing in human nervous system. According to the controversial MJ-12 documents, Bronk not only was a member of MJ-12, reportedly a super-secret group in charge of the UFO issue, but the leader of the team that autopsied the extraterrestrial biological entities recovered from a crash disk near Roswell, New Mexico. After the war, Rockefeller joined the staff of Chase National Bank of New York. Isn't this wonderful? Get tired of UFOs and alien autopsies. You say, I want to be the bank president. Huh? Tutor the turtle. Where his uncle Winthrop Aldrich was chairman of the board and president. Now, we're going to talk about the Aldrich family later, as you probably already know what the Aldrich plan is, right? The Aldrich plan was the plan that went through the lawmaking process of our country, and it was shot down later to come back right back to back as the Federal Reserve Act. But this is accident, right? These names all run in each other. It's just accidental, right? All right, because people think you're crazy if you start thinking that there's some connected dots going on here, right? Because this doesn't happen, right? This This is just chance. These people really never understood this was going to happen, right? So his uncle, Winthrop Aldrich, chairman of the board and president. Chase traced his history back to the central bank advocate Alexander Hamilton's Bank of Manhattan Company, begun in 1799. By 1921, it had become the second largest national bank in the U.S. In 1955, Rockefeller played a major role in the merger of Chase with the Bank of Manhattan Company, which resulted in Chase Manhattan Bank. In 1969, the bank became part of Chase Manhattan Corporation, in line with the trend of establishing holding companies to avoid banking laws prohibiting certain activities, such as acquisition of finance companies. That same year, David Rockefeller became the company's board chairman, executive officer, thanks primarily to his preeminence in international banking. His connection to the world of international politics as well as intelligence were improved when his uncle Aldrich retired as chairman of the bank in 1953 to become the U.S. ambassador to the court of St. James, England. Aldrich was also succeeded by John J. McCloy, former chairman on the Council of Foreign Relations. McCloy, who's been called the architect of the post-war American intelligence establishment, served as Assistant Secretary of War from April 1941 to November 1945, President of the World Bank from 1947 to 1949. So how do you go from intelligence establishment to bank president of the World Bank 1947-49, U.S. Governor and High Commissioner for Germany 1949-52? McCloy also served on the Warren Commission, helping mediate disagreements with members who were troubled by the controversial single bullet theory of JFK's assassination. Now, isn't that funny? Why do one of these people always have to be involved in these things? I mean, if you think about it, people still trying to figure out who killed JFK, right? So I stick one of these people right in the middle of that mess. I was in Texas last year, and on the way to Texas, we stopped by Roswell. They got a UFO museum. Everybody's still talking about that. That's why people like the X-Files. Nobody tells you the truth about it. You don't know it. How come these people were in there too? Huh? You ever notice some of the crazy stuff these people are right in the middle of it, huh? You think that's an accident? But it's a conspiracy, right? You guys are crazy. The Rockefeller influence, if not control, extends far beyond their banking oil interests. The Rockefeller brothers Fund, for example, in 1997 listed nearly $500 million in assets. It was incorporated in 1940 by five brothers. Since that time, the fund has disbursed more than $461 million in grants to a wide range of activities and institutions, including various universities, numerous arts programs, Smithsonian Institute. You'll like to circle this stuff so that you can know. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on page 53. I started at the second paragraph. Yeah, we skipped some parts that we didn't want. You can read the rest. Second paragraph. Rockefeller influence, if not his control, extends far beyond his banking oil interest. Rockefeller Brothers Fund, for example, 1997, listed nearly $500 million in assets. It was incorporated in 1940 by five brothers. Since that time, the fund has disbursed more than $461 million in grants. Now, in 97, it had $500 million in assets. Incorporated in 1940. Since that time, they've disbursed almost the same amount in grants. Now, circle these areas where they give the grant money to, because you all know that when somebody funds your grant programs, there's a bias. All right? There's no doubt about it. There's a bias. That's why everybody keeps trying to link Enron to the Democrats. Everybody keeps linking Enron to the Republicans, because everybody knows when somebody's kicking down money, there's at least a voice. See, and this is what the argument is. People are saying, should we stop lobbyists from lobbying politicians? And the answer is, if somebody wants to give a politician money, that doesn't mean they can't also, with that money, voice their political opinion to that person. Now, that person doesn't have to take it. Now, even though the amount is big, the dilemma is, should we take the money and tell them to shut up, or do they have a right as citizens also to voice their political opinion? So let's at least take into consideration that we still have the exact same battle taking place even today. These are the funds. It disbursed more than $461 million in grants to a wide range of activities and institutions, including various universities, numerous arts programs, the Smithsonian, the Buddhist Zen Center. What the hell do they know about Buddhism? Aspen Institute, Asian Cultural Council, the Brookings Institutes, where your think tanks are, the National Audubon Society. You thought that was just a bunch of bird lovers, huh? National Park Foundation, Planned Parenthood of New York. Sounds like eugenics to me. NAACP. What's that? They still color people? Are any of those around still? German Marshall Fund of the U.S., Yale University, Center for Strategic and International Studies, National Academy of Sciences, the Society for International Development. 1977, the fund contributed $1 million to the Council on Foreign Relations. Perhaps due to the adverse publicity of the conspiracy writers, this amount had dropped to a mere $450,097, $25,000 of which went to study the economic and political implications of Korean unification. The Trilateral Commission, which received $120,000 from the fund in 1977, was not mentioned in the 1997 annual report. We'll learn about those people as we go on. The fund is especially involved with environmental issues, as evidenced by its donations to National Environmental Trust, Greenpeace. Oh, I thought Greenpeace didn't like anybody. Huh? Greenpeace Environmental Trust, National Wildlife Federation, American Conservation Association. Now, isn't that funny that a bunch of oil people are given this? I guess that Chevron commercial's true, huh? Because somebody cares. Huh? Conspiracy authors have noted that if someone owned an interest in companies which might adversely affecting the environment, what a better way to gain some measure of control over activists than by heavy contributions. Abby O'Neill, niece of the Rockefeller brothers, 1998, ended her term as chairwoman of the fund. The position was assumed by Nelson's son, Stephen C. Rockefeller. The one world outlook of the Rockefellers was still evident in the fund's 1997 annual report. Mrs. O'Neill wrote that the fund had a refocused one world strategy with an explicit global perspective and emphasis on the convergence of national and international frameworks. Fund president and CFR member Colin G. Campbell wrote that the Rockefeller money was being used to help create a number of cross-sectoral partnerships that involve such sometimes unlikely partners as nonprofit and for-profit entities, government agencies, non-government organizations, research universities, grassroots, activist groups. In fact, much of the U.S. government's involvement in health, education, and welfare in the latter half of the 20th century seems to have been pioneered by the Rockefeller Foundation. In the first half of that century, commented author Moscow. Rockefeller activities always seem to involve and produce world leaders. Henry Kissinger had already been mentioned. Prior to World War II, a Rockefeller Foundation division on economic research was headed by Canadian M.L. Mackenzie King, a mentor to John D. Jr. Mackenzie later became Prime Minister of Canada. Contributing to the power of their name was the fact that Rockefeller projects were nearly always successful. According to the biographer Alvin Moscow, the two brothers moved warily before lending the Rockefeller name or finances to any endeavor or enterprise. But once committed, they stayed on their commitments for the long haul, giving generously of their money, their time, their efforts. It became known in various civic and social circles. If Rockefeller was involved, the project most likely had merit and was expected to succeed. Despite their close ties and commitments to Britain, the Rockefellers gave the appearance of being a purely American phenomenon, another American banking empire that actually began in Britain. Now, that's where we'll stop. Now, if anything, you get a good look at some of these folk. We've already, maybe we'll talk about Morgan a little bit next week. I think you have it. Did I take you all the way to page 77 in your handouts? No? Oh, okay. Then somebody, whoever got the extra one, got it all the way to page 70. Who got the extra one? You got all the way to page 77. Okay, we'll get you guys from 55 to 77. Morgan, actually the Rothschild agent in America. You're going to find out how they all mix. I think the copy machine was down.